When the Founding Fathers kind of worked out the constitutional provisions for foreign policy, they had two big objectives in mind. One was to ensure that the country was not kind of snuffed out in its infancy by the great powers that encircled the United States at the time, Britain, France, and Spain. And the idea was to ensure that the national government was strong enough that it could stand up to the kind of geopolitical challenges that existed. The second goal, however, was to ensure that in the process of meeting that challenge, this international or external challenge, that too much power was not consolidated in any one branch, and that you didn't end up with tyranny and authoritarian government. And so the solution to that problem was to create a system of checks and balances to separate powers, to vest some powers in the president and to vest other powers in the Congress. And these are known as the enumerated powers in the Constitution. Basically, the president was given the power as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, given the authority to appoint ambassadors, negotiate treaties. The Congress was given the authority to actually declare war and to raise armies. Basically, what the founders wanted to do was ensure that investing a certain amount of authority in the president, that they didn't give him a blank check. At the same time, what they ensured is that the president, in negotiating treaties, had to win congressional approval, and that any ambassadors that were appointed had to enjoy also congressional approval before taking up residence in a foreign land. So these are known as the enumerated powers, and they're really important in kind of understanding the balance or the division of labor between the presidency, between the president and Congress. But as important as they are, they're not the only powers. It turns out that over time, what Congress has done is also delegated power to the president, powers that were not listed or identified in the Constitution. And these are known as the delegated powers, and there are many of them, but probably the most important is the power to use military force. Over time, basically, the president has increased his ability to use military force, to use it in ways that do not require a declaration of war. In fact, if you look at the history of the instances of U.S. Application of force, the use of force, there have only been 5 occasions when the United States actually declared war, when Congress declared war. There's about a dozen or so other occasions where Congress authorized the use of force, such as it did in October of 2002 in the case of Iraq. But in most instances, there are many, many instances, hundreds actually, where the president has used military force sometimes in significant ways and sometimes in fairly inconspicuous and innocuous ways, but in all cases, in ways that were not enumerated by the Constitution. And these are basically powers, or a power that Congress delegated to the Congress.